The security camera in the corner of the bedroom had been recording continuously for months, installed by the family to monitor Ozzy's condition during the advanced stages of his Parkinson's disease. None of them expected it would capture the most heartbreaking and beautiful farewell in rock and roll history. The timestamp reads 5:47 a.m., July 22nd, 2025, and what unfolds over the next 3 hours and 23 minutes would later be called the most powerful documentation of love, loss, and legacy ever recorded. The footage begins in the pre-dawn darkness of the Osbourne family's Buckinghamshire estate. Through the infrared lens, we see Ozzy lying in the hospital bed that had been his world for the past several weeks, surrounded by the quiet hum of medical equipment that had become the soundtrack to his final chapter. Sharon sleeps fitfully in the chair beside him, her hand still clasped in his, even in her exhaustion, a testament to a love that had endured 43 years of unimaginable highs and devastating lows. At 5:52 a.m., the camera captures the moment Ozzy's eyes flutter open for what would be the last time. There's something different in his gaze this morning, a clarity that the Parkinson's had stolen from him months ago, but has mysteriously returned for these final hours. He looks directly at the camera, as if he knows it's there, as if he understands that these moments need to be preserved for posterity. His lips move slightly, forming words too quiet for the microphone to capture, but those who would later watch the footage swear they can read his lips saying, "One last show." If this story is breaking your heart the way it's breaking ours to write, please take a moment to leave a like. These final moments deserve to be witnessed and remembered. The first sign that this day would be different comes at 6:15 a.m. when Ozzy somehow finds the strength to gently squeeze Sharon's hand. She wakes immediately, the way only someone who has spent decades caring for another person can, instantly alert and focused on his face. The camera captures their wordless communication, a language developed over 4 decades of marriage that transcends the need for speech. She knows. Somehow, she knows this is the day they've been dreading. "Good morning, my love," Sharon whispers, her voice barely audible, but clear enough for the sensitive microphone to pick up. "How are you feeling?" Ozzy's response shocks everyone who would later watch the footage. His voice, which had been reduced to barely audible whispers for months, somehow finds a strength that seems to come from somewhere beyond his failing body. "Better than I have in months," he says, and impossibly, he's telling the truth. The camera captures what can only be described as a transformation, not a physical healing, but something spiritual, as if he's drawing on reserves of energy saved specifically for this moment. "I think," he continues, his words measured and deliberate, "it's time to call the kids." The next hour of footage shows the gradual assembly of the Osbourne family. Jack arrives first at 7:23 a.m., having driven through the night from London after receiving Sharon's call. The camera captures his shock at seeing his father more lucid and present than he'd been in months. Kelly follows 20 minutes later, still in her pajamas, her hair uncombed, carrying the weight of knowing this might be their last conversation. Amy, who had always been the most private of the children, arrives with tears already streaming down her face, while Louis, the youngest, brings with him a quiet strength that seems to anchor the entire family. What the camera documents next is extraordinary. Instead of the somber deathbed scene everyone expected, Ozzy orchestrates what can only be described as a celebration. Despite his physical limitations, he becomes the conductor of his own farewell symphony, directing conversations, sharing memories, and ensuring that his final hours are filled with laughter rather than tears. "Come here, all of you," he says at 8:47 a.m., his voice carrying an authority that had commanded stadiums for 5 decades. "Sit on the bed. I don't care if it's crowded. I want to feel you all close to me." The camera captures the beautiful chaos as his family arranges themselves around him, transforming the hospital bed into something that resembles a family gathering rather than a medical emergency. Sharon remains at his right side, her position sacred and unquestioned, while the children find spots wherever they can fit, creating a human cocoon of love around their father. "I want to tell you all a story," Ozzy begins, and what follows is a 43-minute monologue that would later be transcribed and published as one of the most moving pieces of autobiographical literature ever recorded. He talks about his childhood in Birmingham, painting pictures of poverty and desperation that somehow led to the most extraordinary life imaginable. He shares stories the family had never heard before, Memories that had been locked away in his mind and are now spilling out as if a dam has burst. The camera captures every detail. The way Kelly's hand instinctively reaches for her phone to record this separately, creating the footage that would later go viral. The way Jack leans forward, desperate not to miss a single word. The way Amy, who had always been closest to her father, rests her head on his shoulder, her tears falling silently onto his hospital gown. The way Louis, trying to be strong, occasionally wipes his eyes when he thinks no one is looking. But it's Sharon's face that provides the most compelling viewing. The camera captures decades of shared history playing across her features. Moments of terror during his worst binges, joy during his greatest triumphs, and countless ordinary days that had somehow added up to an extraordinary life. She watches him with the intensity of someone trying to memorize every detail, every expression, every inflection of his voice. At 9:35 a.m., the footage captures one of the most remarkable moments ever recorded. Ozzy begins to sing. His voice, ravaged by decades of performing and months of illness, somehow finds its way back to something that resembles the power that had made him legendary. He starts with Changes, the Black Sabbath ballad that had become his most personal song, and one by one, his family joins in. The camera documents something magical happening in that room. As their voices blend together, the clinical atmosphere of the makeshift hospital room transforms into something that feels almost sacred. Medical equipment fades into the background, replaced by the most important sound in the world, a family singing together, possibly for the last time. "That's what I want you to remember," Ozzy says when the song ends. Not the concerts or the albums or any of that. This moment, this love, this is what mattered. The footage then captures what would become the most quoted portion of his final hours. At 10:18 a.m., Ozzy looks directly into the security camera and begins speaking as if he's addressing the millions of fans around the world who would eventually watch this footage. "If you're watching this," he says, his voice stronger than it had been in months, "it means I'm gone, but don't be sad for me. I lived the most incredible life any working-class kid from Birmingham could ever dream of. I got to scream my heart out to millions of people who understood exactly what I was feeling. I got to make music that mattered, but most importantly, I got to love and be loved by the most amazing family in the world." The camera captures his children's reaction to this impromptu farewell address. They're mesmerized, watching their father transform from a dying man into the performer who had captivated audiences for 5 decades. Even in his hospital bed, even with his body failing, he's still putting on a show, still making sure his audience, in this case, his family and future viewers, gets exactly what they need from him. "People always ask me about my regrets," he continues, still speaking to the camera. "They want me to say I regret the drinking, the drugs, the crazy stuff. But you know what? I don't. Because all of that led me here, to this bed, surrounded by these people who love me not despite my flaws, but because of them. Every mistake I made, every wrong turn I took, it was all part of the journey that brought me to this perfect moment." At 11:02 a.m., the footage captures what many would later call the most beautiful moment ever recorded. Ozzy asks Sharon to bring him his guitar, the same acoustic instrument he'd used to write some of his most personal songs. Despite the tremor in his hands from the Parkinson's, despite his obvious weakness, he somehow manages to play. It's not perfect. His fingers struggle to find the right positions. His timing wavers. But it's authentic in a way that his polished studio recordings could never be. He plays "Mama, I'm Coming Home," the song he'd written as a love letter to Sharon and his children during one of his darkest periods. The camera captures the profound emotion in the room as he sings, his voice cracking on certain words but never giving up. This isn't a performance, it's a prayer, a final offering to the people who had stood by him through everything. "That song," he says when he finishes, handing the guitar back to Sharon, "that was me telling you all that no matter how far I wandered, no matter how lost I got, home was wherever you were, and I've been home for 43 years. The middle portion of the footage, from approximately 11:30 a.m. to 1:15 p.m., captures something unprecedented. Ozzy conducting what amounts to a life review session with his family. He asks each of them to share their favorite memory of him, not as Ozzy Osbourne the rock star, but as their father and husband. The camera documents laughter, tears, and revelations that paint a picture of a man far more complex and tender than his public persona ever suggested. Jack shares a story about Ozzy teaching him to ride a bike, running alongside him for hours in their backyard, never giving up despite multiple falls and scraped knees. Kelly talks about the time he spent 3 days learning to braid her hair because she wanted it done perfectly for a school dance, and how he practiced on her dolls until he got it right. Amy reveals that he used to sneak into her room when she was a teenager and leave encouraging notes on her dresser whenever she was struggling with something. Lewis, the youngest, shares how his father had attended every single one of his football matches, no matter how exhausted he was from touring. Sharon's contribution to this memory session is perhaps the most moving. She talks about the quiet moments, the ones the cameras never captured and the public never saw. She describes mornings when he would wake up early just to make her coffee, the way he remembered every anniversary, not just of their wedding, but of their first date, their first kiss, their first fight, their first reconciliation. She talks about how he would hold her hand during movies, even after decades of marriage, and how he still opened doors for her and pulled out her chair at restaurants. "People see the crazy rock star," she says, looking directly at him. "But I got to live with the gentle man who worried about whether I was warm enough at night, and who still left me love notes in my luggage when I traveled for work." The camera captures Ozzy's reaction to these revelations. For perhaps the first time in his life, he seems to truly understand the impact he had on the people closest to him. The man who had spent decades doubting his worth, who had struggled with addiction, partly because he never felt good enough, finally sees himself reflected in the eyes of people who loved him unconditionally. At 1:47 p.m., the footage takes a dramatic turn. Ozzy's energy, which had seemed inexhaustible for hours, begins to wane visibly. The camera captures the gradual change in his breathing, the way his voice becomes softer, his movements more deliberate. But instead of becoming morbid, the atmosphere in the room somehow becomes even more sacred. "I need to tell you all something important," he says, gathering his family closer. "When I'm gone, people are going to want to turn me into a saint or a devil. Don't let them. I was just a man who got very lucky. I had talent, yes, but lots of people have talent. What I had that was special was all of you. You made me better than I ever could have been alone." The camera documents his specific words to each family member, final pieces of advice and expressions of love that would sustain them through the difficult years ahead. To Jack, he expresses pride in the man he'd become and confidence in his ability to carry on the family legacy. To Kelly, he acknowledges her strength and creativity, telling her that watching her overcome her own struggles had been one of his greatest sources of inspiration. To Amy, he speaks about her authenticity and independence, qualities he admired even when they sometimes put her at odds with the family's public life. To Louis, he offers encouragement to forge his own path, free from the weight of the Osbourne name, if that's what he chooses. But it's his final words to Sharon that provide the most compelling footage. At 2:23 p.m., he asks the children to give them a few minutes alone, and the camera captures the most intimate conversation between two people who had shared everything. "You saved my life," he tells her, his voice barely audible, but his words crystal clear. "Not once, but over and over again. Every time I was ready to give up, you gave me a reason to keep fighting. Every time I forgot who I was, you reminded me. You turned a broken boy from Birmingham into a man worthy of love." The camera captures Sharon's response, spoken through tears but with absolute conviction. "You saved mine too, John Michael. You taught me what real love looks like. You showed me that it's possible to love someone completely, flaws and all, and have that love returned tenfold." What follows is 15 minutes of private conversation between husband and wife, much of it inaudible to the camera's microphone, but visible in their gestures, their touches, their shared looks. It's the most intimate footage imaginable, and yet somehow it doesn't feel intrusive. Instead, it feels like witnessing something sacred, a love so pure and honest that it transcends the boundaries between public and private. At 2:51 p.m., Ozzy calls his children back into the room. The camera captures what would be his final performance, though he doesn't use his voice. Instead, he conducts his family through a rendition of Changes, using only his hands, his eyes, and the strength of his spirit. Unable to sing along due to his weakening condition, he becomes the conductor of his own farewell symphony, guiding his family through the song that had become the soundtrack to their lives together. The footage shows something extraordinary happening during this final song. As his family sings, Ozzy's face transforms. The pain that had been etched there for months fades away, replaced by something that can only be described as peace. The camera captures the exact moment when the man who had spent his life performing for others finally becomes the audience, listening to the most important concert of his life being performed by the people who mattered most to him. At 3:17 p.m., the medical equipment in the room begins to signal changes in Ozzy's vital signs, but the camera shows that he's aware of what's happening and isn't afraid. Instead, he uses his remaining strength to offer comfort to his family, squeezing hands, making eye contact, and somehow managing to smile even as his body begins to shut down. "Don't stop singing," he whispers as his breathing becomes more labored. "Please, don't stop singing." The final hour of footage captures the Osbourne family singing together as Ozzy slips away. They perform every song they can remember him singing to them over the years, from Black Sabbath classics to lullabies he'd made up when they were children. The camera documents, voices, breaking with emotion, but continuing anyway, honoring his final request, even as their hearts shatter. At 4:33 p.m., the camera captures the moment when Ozzy's breathing stops, but the singing continues. For 10 more minutes, his family serenades him into whatever comes next, their voices creating a bridge between this world and the next, ensuring that his final experience of life is filled with love and music. The security footage doesn't end there. It continues for another hour, documenting a family sitting in stunned silence, processing the enormity of what they've just experienced. The camera captures Sharon holding Ozzy's hand long after he's gone, as if her touch might somehow call him back. It shows his children taking turns saying private goodbyes, sharing final words that only they will ever know. But perhaps most remarkably, the footage captures the moment when grief begins its transformation into something else. At 5:41 p.m., nearly 12 hours after the day began, Kelly looks up at the security camera and says, he would have loved knowing this was all recorded. He always said the most important performances were the ones with the smallest audiences. 3 days after Ozzy's death, the family made the unprecedented decision to release portions of the security footage to the public. The response was immediate and overwhelming, but not in the way anyone expected. Instead of treating it as a spectacle or an invasion of privacy, the world received it as a gift, a masterclass in how to love, how to live, and how to say goodbye. The footage went viral within hours, but it spread as something sacred rather than sensational. Fans around the world watched in reverent silence as their hero demonstrated that the greatest performance of his life wasn't on any stage, but in a bedroom surrounded by family, showing them how to face death with dignity, humor, and grace. Music industry legends who had known Ozzy for decades spoke about how the footage revealed the man they had always known behind the scenes, someone whose capacity for love matched his talent for performance. The recording became more than documentation. It became inspiration for countless families dealing with their own losses, showing them that even in the darkest moments, love and music could provide light. Mental health advocates seized on Ozzy's openness about his fears and vulnerabilities in the footage, using his example to encourage others to speak honestly about their struggles. The man who had built a career on confronting dark themes had, in his final moments, shown that the greatest courage comes from admitting our fears and choosing love anyway. But perhaps the most profound impact of the footage was on the conversation about death and dying in modern society. Ozzy's final hours, filled with laughter, music, and honest conversation, stood in stark contrast to the fear and denial that often surrounds death in contemporary culture. He had shown the world that dying could be approached as the final creative act of a life well lived. The footage also sparked a global movement among families to document their own precious moments. Camera sales spiked as people realized they needed to capture not just special occasions, but everyday interactions with the people who mattered most. Sing Together became a trending hashtag as families shared videos of themselves performing music together, inspired by the Osbournes' example. In the weeks following the video's release, musicians around the world began incorporating moments of vulnerability into their performances, inspired by Ozzy's final demonstration that true strength comes from emotional honesty. The footage had inadvertently launched a movement toward authenticity in an industry often criticized for its artifice. The tragic beauty of Ozzy Osbourne's final moments, caught on camera, wasn't in the sadness of goodbye, but in the celebration of a life fully lived and love fully expressed. The security system that was meant to monitor his health had instead captured something far more valuable, proof that even rock and roll legends are, at their core, simply human beings trying to love and be loved as completely as possible. The boy from Birmingham, who had once thought he'd never amount to anything, had ensured that both John Michael Osbourne and Ozzy Osbourne would be remembered forever, not just for the music they created, but for the love they shared and the family they cherished above all else. His final performance, captured accidentally by a security camera, had become his greatest masterpiece, a testament to the power of love to transform even the darkest moments into something beautiful. So, these final moments remind us that behind every public figure is a human being with the same hopes, fears, and capacity for love as the rest of us. Ozzy's final gift wasn't another song or performance. It was a masterclass in how to love without fear and face death with dignity. If this story moved you, please share it and remember to tell the people in your life how much they mean to you while you still have the chance.